Guten Tag, Klasse. Heute lernen wir Konjunktiv der Vergangenheit. So this is the subjunctive of the past. The Vergangenheit means the past. Notizen sind auf Seite 16 in deinem Heft im Kapitel 4. Back in Chapter 1, you learned to use the Konjunktiv 2 to talk about hypothetical events or to express wishes about the present or the future. You can use a past form, which is the Konjunktiv der Vergangenheit, to speculate about events that could have happened or to express wishes about the past. You're going to notice a couple similar verbs from the Konjunktiv 2. We're going to be using hätte and wäre. So here you might see a couple examples from the Fotoroman. So here we have Sabita saying, Ich hätte nie gedacht, dass du solche Gefühle hast. So the hätte, would have. Nie means never, so I would never have gedacht, I would never have thought that you had such feelings. And then we have Hans on the right saying, Das hätte ich nie sagen sollen. So I should have, here's the should, sollen, I should have never said that. Let's take a look at the basics of how to form the Konjunktiv in der Vergangenheit. The Konjunktiv der Vergangenheit is not that difficult to create. It's very similar to the past tenses that you already know. So we're going to start off with a present tense sentence, Ich mache ein Picknick, I'm having a picnic. And then the perfect form of it for the past, Ich habe ein Picknick gemacht. So to have a picnic does not involve change of location. It's not a transitive verb, so we're using haben as the helping verb. The Plusquamperfekt version changes habe to hatte. So instead of saying I have had a picnic, now you're saying I had a picnic. Now, to change it to the Konjunktiv der Vergangenheit, you take the hatte and you add umlauts and make it hätte. So instead of saying had or have, you're saying I hypothetically would have had a picnic. And that is all it takes to create the Konjunktiv der Vergangenheit. You change the Plusquamperfekt form from hatte to hätte, and there you go. Here's an example with a verb of motion. Wandert in die Berge. So he is hiking in the mountains. The past tense, because it's a verb of motion, uses sein as the helping verb. And because the subject is sein conjugates to ist. Ist in die Berge gewandert. So he has hiked in the mountains. For the Plusquamperfekt, ist changes to war. So instead of he has hiked, it's he had hiked in the mountains. Well, we want to change it to he would have hiked, hypothetically. So var becomes the subjunctive form wäre. Wäre in die Berge gewandert. He would have hiked in the mountains. So just like those examples showed you, the formation of the Konjunktiv der Vergangenheit is very similar to the Plusquamperfekt. Instead of using hatte or var, we're using wäre or hätte to mean that had or would have hypothetically. So here's an example in the Plusquamperfekt. Ich hatte ihm das gesagt. I had said that to him. If I changed hatte, so if I changed hatte to hätte, now you're saying I would have said that to him. You can use this to express wishes about the past and use the subjunctive form of wünschen. Ich wünschte, I wish, and then we have ich hätte, I would have said. So ich wünschte, ich hätte ihm das gesagt. I would have said that to him. So here's a couple more examples with the difference between when you use a form of sein or when to use a form of haben. So if you have the verb wissen, then wissen is to know. That is not a verb of motion, so we're going to use forms of hätte for that helping verb. So ich hätte gewusst, I would have known. Du hättest gewusst, you would have known. Notice that the ich and RCS forms are the same. So ich hätte und RCS hätte. That's the same as when we learned the Konjunktiv 2. That hasn't changed. The ich and RCS forms are the same. And then we have the verb gehen, which is a verb of motion. So instead of hätte, it's going to use a form of wäre to form the would have. And again, just like the hätte, the ich and RCS forms are the same. And then there's one example here where there's a reflexive pronoun, that's sich. So you're going to treat it just like a normal verb with mich, dich, sich, uns, euch, and sich, respectively, as needed. Remember, for those verbs that are reflexive, that the mich and the dich might change to mir or dir if the sentence that you are using has something else in it to act as the direct object. So here's an example sentence using a reflexive verb. Ich rasiere mir die Beine. So you might remember that from chapter 1. I shave my legs. So the mich became mir because right here, die Beine is acting as the direct object. So the reflexive pronoun mich becomes mir because it is now the indirect object. Well, shaving my legs is not a verb of motion. So if I'm changing this to be in the Konjunktiv der Vergangenheit and I want to say I would have shaved my legs, think about it. Is it going to be ich hätte or ich wäre? Well, it's going to be hätte because it's not a verb of motion. And then the past participle of rasiere will be at the end. So ich hätte mir die Beine rasiert. Now you're saying I would have shaved my legs. Here are some more examples of the Konjunktiv der Vergangenheit. Ich wünschte, ich hätte den Sonnenaufgang gesehen. So I wish I would have seen the sunrise. The other three examples use wenn for if. Remember that wenn is a subordinating conjunction, so when you use it, that verb is going to get kicked to the end of the clause. So see where I underlined it had wenn, and the hätte or wäre is at the very end of the clause. Wenn du nor, so adding nor makes it if only you, wärest is our would have, aufgewacht, woken up früher, earlier. Wenn wir früher angekommen wären, if we, wären's our would have, if we would have arrived earlier, hätten wir mehr Zeit gehabt. So we would have had more time. So ankommen, to arrive, means that you have changed your location from being in one place to now arriving somewhere new. So it uses wären. Whereas haben, being gehabt here, uses haben as a helping verb. So it's hätten. Hätten wir mehr Zeit gehabt. We would have had more time. Wenn ich mehr Zeit gehabt hätte, so if I, there's our would have, and then had more time, hätte ich, I would have mich besser darüber informiert. I would have informed myself better or more darüber, about it. Modal verbs is where things always tend to get a little bit different. So if you're using a modal verb with another verb in a sentence, like the two that I made below, wir sollen wandern, kann dir helfen, notice you have the modal verb, here sollen and kann, and there's a second verb in the sentence, wandern und helfen. Well, if you have two verbs in a sentence using a modal, one of them being a modal verb, the construction is going to be a little bit different. One thing to know is that the auxiliary verb that you use with modals is always going to be haben. It will never be sein. So if you have that modal verb, you'll always see hätte in your sentence. It will never be wäre. The word order that you should remember when using the Konjunktiv der Vergangenheit with modals in another verb is the saying aim. It's an acronym. So the A is auxiliary, the I is the infinitive, and the M is the modal. So we've got the auxiliary verb first, and then at the end of your sentence you have the infinitive of the other verb you used, and then your modal in its infinitive at the end. So again, auxiliary, infinitive, modal. Auxiliary, infinitive, modal. Auxiliary, infinitive, modal. So if I wanted to change the sentences that I have below here to be in the subjunctive, wir sollen wandern, because we're using a modal verb, we have to use a form of hätten. So wir hätten, and then next verb will be the infinitive. So wandern, and then at the very end you have your modal, sollen. Wir hätten wandern sollen. We should have hiked. Kann dir helfen. So again, we need our auxiliary. And because we're using a modal verb, that means we have to use a form of hätten. So hätte. We have dir still in the sentence. And then at the end, the infinitive and the modal. Hätte dir helfen. I'm out of space. So that should say können. Hätte dir helfen können. So he should have been able to help you. So again, those modal verbs are really going to change and mess with word order. So if you have a subordinate clause with a modal verb, we're still going to follow the aim rule. Auxiliary, infinitive, modal. Even though, for example, here we have a das clause. Same thing in the example on the right, we have a das clause, but our word order with this modal verb is still going to be auxiliary, infinitive, modal. So making our own example using some of our unit vocab, if I wanted to take the sentence, wir sollen den Wald erforschen, we should explore the forest. If it were Konjunktiv der Vergangenheit, it would say we should have explored the forest. Well, I want to put that into a das clause. I think that we should have explored the forest. So after my das, I'm going to use the wir and the den Wald. And then I've got to put in the rest of the verbs in the aim format. So we're using a modal verb, so that means that we're using a form of hätten, and wir is the subject, so hätten, and then the infinitive, erforschen. I'm going to end it because I don't have space, and then you're going to have the modal verb at the end. Sollen. Ich denke, dass wir den Wald hätten erforschen sollen. I think that we should have explored the forest. If you have a sentence that uses a modal and there's not an extra verb in the sentence that you would use as an infinitive, then the Konjunktiv der Vergangenheit is formed just as with other verbs. So the rule remains, though, that you always use a form of hätte with modal verbs. So hätte gekonnt, and there's a nicht here, so would not have, können is to be able to, would not have been able to. hätten gewollt. And there's a nicht again, so wouldn't have, there's our hypothetical, would not have, and then gewollt, wanted. So this and the next slide give us some examples of ways that can be useful to use the Konjunktiv der Vergangenheit. One being expressing wishes about events that are already past. So you would use ich wünschte, for example, to say I wish. In this case, ich wünschte, ich hätte mehr Zeit gehabt. I wish I would have had more time. And then I can give a little bit more details. Den Wald zu erforschen, to explore the forest. Ich wünschte, ich hätte mehr Zeit, für die Prüfung zu lernen, to learn or study more for the test. Ich wünschte, ich wäre zu Hause geblieben. I wish I would have stayed home. Ich wünschte, ich wäre nach Florida gereist. I wish I would have traveled to Florida. Maybe if I wanted to talk about what I wish I did last summer. Another way to express a wish could be using wenn and nor for if only. So in this case, wenn wir nur länger auf der Insel hätten bleiben können. If only we have können, so could have, and then bleiben. If only we could have stayed longer on the island. So saying ich wünschte and using wenn nor for if only are great ways to express wishes. Just remember to use that hätte or wäre to be in the Konjunktiv der Vergangenheit. Other ways that are useful to use the Konjunktiv der Vergangenheit could be to make statements or ask questions about hypothetical situations in the past. I like this first one, was wäre passiert, so what would have happened. And then using wenn to say if, wenn ich dort nicht pünktlich angekommen wäre, so if I would not have arrived or gotten there pünktlich, on time. Was hättet ihr an seiner Stelle gemacht? So an seiner Stelle would be if you were him or in his place. So what would you guys have done? Wenn das Wetter schön gewesen wäre, so if the weather would have been schön, hätten wir ein Picknick gemacht. So hätten wir, we would have had a picnic. Wenn sie sehr krank gewesen wäre, so if she would have been, or if she had been sehr krank, very sick. Hätten wir sie ins Krankenhaus bringen müssen, so we would have had to bring or take her to the hospital. So think about this question. Was hättest du heute gemacht? So hättest gemacht, what would you have done? Heute, today, wenn es nicht geregnet hätte. So we've got wenn es, if it would not have rained. So what would you have done today if it would not have rained? Was hättest du heute gemacht, wenn es nicht geregnet hätte? Think about it for a second. Write a sentence out and see if yours matches something that I am going to write down as an example answer. So pause if you need to, and then check back in. So some example answers may be ich wäre gewandert. I would have hiked. Ich hätte Freunde besucht. I would have visited friends. Ich hätte mein Fahrrad fahren können. So I would have been able to ride my bike. See if any of the sentences you thought of are similarly structured to these. See if you're on the right track. I also want to spend a little bit of time going over some of the verb slides so that you get some sentences started, and I can give you a few examples. So the first verb in Unit 4a is aufgehen, and notice that it's in red, which means that it's an irregular verb. That's because the root of the verb is gehen. So we know that the past tense of gehen is gegangen. So that does not follow the rules and the patterns, which is why this is in red. Remember also that it's a separable verb, so it separates between auf and gehen, which is why your present tense sentence, Die Sonne geht morgens auf, the auf is at the end of the sentence. And gehen is a verb of motion, so we're going to use sein as the helping verb for our past tenses. Because it's using sein, that means whenever I'm forming the Konjunktiv der Vergangenheit, if my subject is still die Sonne, what do you think? Is it going to be wäre or hätte? Well, because it's a verb of motion, it's going to be wäre. So, die Sonne wäre morgens, and the past tense of aufgehen, well, gehen becomes gegangen, so we just have to add auf to the start of it. Aufgegangen. Aufgegangen. Die Sonne wäre morgens aufgegangen. The sun would have risen in the morning. The next verb that we have in Unit 4a is much like aufgehen, it's untergehen. And untergehen means to set. It's still using gehen as the root verb, so it's going to be very much like aufgehen. And it is separable, which is why in our present tense sentence, we have geht and unter separated. Die Sonne geht abends unter. The sun sets or is setting at night. So our Konjunktiv der Vergangenheit sentence, we're still starting with the same subject, die Sonne. And because our root verb is gehen, it's a verb of motion, so is it going to be hätte or wäre? All right, it's a verb of motion, so it's going to be wäre. And then we have abends and untergegangen. Very little space left. Untergegangen. Sorry for the bad handwriting there. So the sun would have set at night. The last verb that I want to look at today is erforschen. Now this one's in blue, which means it's a regular verb. It follows all the rules. And because it starts with er, that's an inseparable prefix. That means for the past tenses, there won't be a g for the past participle. So the past participle will just be erforscht. So when we're using Konjunktiv der Vergangenheit, I want to make sure I'm using the same wording from the present tense sentence I have as a starter. The subject is wir. Do you think it's going to be wir hätten or wir wären? Well, whenever you're exploring, you don't necessarily have to be moving. You don't necessarily have to be relocating to explore. You can explore things online. You can be looking through a microscope. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're relocating. So it's going to be hätten. Wir hätten die Natur, and our past participle at the end, erforscht. We would have explored nature. So now that we've looked at 3 examples, there are more verbs in this chapter, not a lot, but maybe take some time now and fill in the Konjunktiv der Vergangenheit sentences for those slides. If you're on a roll, keep going back to those previous vocab verbs in previous chapters and fill in the Konjunktiv der Vergangenheit sentences for those too. Out of this whole list, the only one we haven't done yet is the Konjunktiv 1, which will be coming up in just probably about 2 weeks. So don't stress. Everything else we've done, we just have one more to go. We will get there, I promise. Let me know if you have any questions und viel Glück.